Happy morning, children. In today's class, we're going to see a new chapter from history, chapter number 5, the age of industrialization. So today we are familiar with the term industrialization, and this term has become a part of our daily life. We read about various industries, industrialists in newspapers and journals and all. But the question here arises as to how did the industries come into being? Isn't it? We all have a question. How did industries come into being? So all these things will be discussed in our chapter, the age of industrialization. So let's begin with our chapter. To begin with, we'll discuss this picture here. So this artwork was basically a cover page of a music book. In 1900, a famous music publisher, E.T. Paul, had produced this book. And if you look into this picture, we'll see an image of a goddess. She is picturized as an angel of progress who bears a flag of the new century. She is standing on a wheel with wings that will take her to the future. Behind her are the symbols of progress such as railways, camera, machines, and etc. We'll start with the introduction. This glorification of machines and technology is even more marked in a picture which appeared on the pages of a trade magazine over 100 years ago, and it shows two magicians. The one at the top is Aladdin from the Orient, who built a beautiful palace with his magic lamp. The one at the bottom is the modern mechanic who with his modern tools weaves a new magic, builds bridges, ships, towers and high-rise buildings. Aladdin is shown as representing the East and the past. The mechanic stands for the West and modernity. If you see the picture which is in the page number 104, you could see two magicians. So there were some more examples and depiction of glorification of machines and technology by the people. So one such was the picture that appeared on a trade magazine titled The Two Magicians. Okay, so what is the title? The Two Magicians. On the top is Aladdin from the Orient, who has built a beautiful palace with the help of his magic lamp, and below him is the picture of a mechanic. He is the one who with his modern tools has built bridges, ships, towers and tall buildings. And Aladdin is shown as the symbolic representation of East and the past. On the other hand, the mechanic symbolizes the West and its modernity. These images offer us a triumphant account of the modern world. Within this account, the modern world is associated with rapid technological change and innovations, machines and factories, railways and steamships. The history of industrialization thus becomes simply a story of development, and the modern age appears as a wonderful time of technological progress. So here, this kind of image offers a victorious account of the modern world. As per this account, today's world is closely located with technological change and various innovations. The use of machines, railways and steamships narrates us a story of industrialization and development. These images have become a part of popular imagination, and industrialization spread to railways and the construction of various buildings and bridges is a symbol of society's development. So now the question arises as to how we can relate ourselves to these images and ideas. So is industrialization a rapid process, or is it possible for us to continue this glorious journey? So all these questions will be answered in our chapter. So to begin with, we'll discuss about Britain, which is considered as the first industrial nation, and then we'll discuss about India, where industrial changes took place because they were imposed by colonial rule on our country. Okay, the first topic, before the Industrial Revolution. All too often we associate industrialization with the growth of factory industry. So when we talk of industrial production, we refer to factory production, isn't it? And when we talk of industrial workers, we mean factory workers. So histories of industrialization very often begin with the setting up of the first factories. Okay, so there is a problem with such ideas. Even before factories began to dot the landscape in England and Europe, there was large scale industrial production for an international market. So this was not based on factories. Many historians now refer to this phase of industrialization as Proto-Industrialization. So here proto means indicating the first or early form of something. So it is said to be Proto-Industrialization. So that is the first or early form of something. In the 17th and 18th centuries, merchants from the towns in Europe began moving to the countryside, supplying money to peasants and artisans, persuading them to produce for an international market. With the expansion of world trade and the acquisition of colonies in different parts of the world, the demand for goods began growing. But merchants could not expand production within towns. This was because here urban craft and trade guides were powerful. These were associations of producers that trained craftspeople, maintained control over production, regulated competition and prices, and restricted the entry of new people into the trade. Rulers granted different guides the monopoly right to produce and trade in specific products. It was therefore difficult for new merchants to set up business in towns, so they turned to the countryside. So if we talk about the 17th and 18th centuries, merchants in Europe began moving to the countryside where they used to supply money in order to persuade the rural peasants and artisans to produce for the international market. So as the world trade expanded and colonization of various parts of the world began, it led to the increase of demand of goods. So here the problem arose that the merchants were not able to expand their production in the towns. It was because the urban crafts and the trade guilds were more powerful, and these were the powerful groups or associations of the producers. So they used to train the craftspeople and maintain control over production, and they regulate the competition and the prices, and they even restricted the entry of new businessmen into the trade. And even the kings too granted monopoly to few of the associations. So no other person could enter into these associations, so no one other than these associations could produce or deal in particular products. So here we can say that there was a great competition for any of the new merchant. So due to this, most of them turned towards the villages, so they moved to the countryside. So the peasants of the countryside, who were earlier dependent on the common fields for their survival, where they used to gather firewood, berries, vegetables, hay and straw, they started looking for some alternative sources of income. And most of them had tiny plots which could not provide employment to all the members of the family. So therefore they easily gave their consent to work for the merchants, and the main benefit to work for the merchants was that it allowed them to stay in the countryside and take care of their fields while they were working for the proto-industries. And working for such industries not only provide them with some income, but also facilitated them to make full use of their family labor resources. Within the system, a close relationship developed between the town and the countryside. Merchants were based in towns, but the work was done mostly in the countryside. A merchant clothier in England purchased wool from a wool stapler and carried it to the spinners. The yarn that was spun was taken in subsequent stages of production to weavers, fullers, and then to dyers. And here stapler means a person who staples or sorts wool according to its fiber, and fuller means a person who fulls, that is gathers cloth by pleating. The finishing was done in London before the export merchants sold the cloth in the international market. London in fact came to be known as the finishing centre. As you could see, a close relationship formed between villages and towns due to this system. Merchants were generally based in towns, whereas the work was done mostly in the countryside. And a merchant dealing in clothes, he would buy wool from a wool stapler and then take it to the spinners, and from there the thread was taken in subsequent stages of production to weavers, fullers, and then to dyers. So the final finishing was done in London before exporting the cloth to the international markets. So soon London emerged as an finishing center, and hence this proto-industrial system was a part of a network of commercial exchanges, and it was controlled by merchants, and the goods were produced by a vast number of producers who were working at their homes and not in factories. So there were around 20 to 25 workers employed by each merchant at each stage. So here we can say that each merchant had around 100 workers working under him. The next topic is the coming up of the factory. The first symbol of the new era was cotton. Its production boomed in the late 19th century. In 1760, Britain was importing 2.5 million pounds of raw cotton to feed its cotton industry. By 1787, this import soared to 22 million pounds, and this increase was linked to a number of changes within the process of production. And let us look briefly at some of these. So the factories, though it came up by the 1730s in England, but it was only in the late 18th century that the number of factories increased, and the first sign of the new era was cotton, and the cotton production increased in the late 19th century, and in 1760 Britain was importing 2.5 million pounds of raw cotton to use it as a raw material for its cotton industry. So here the question arises as to what led to this increase in the production of cotton. So let's have a look at this. A series of inventions in the 18th century increased the efficacy of each step of the production process, that is carding, twisting, and spinning and rolling. They enhanced the output per worker, enabling each worker to produce more, and they made possible the production of stronger threads and yarn. Then Richard Arkwright created the cotton mill. Till this time, as you have seen, cloth production was spread all over the countryside and carried out within village households. But now, the costly new machines could be purchased, set up, and maintained in the mill. Within the mill, all processes were brought together under one roof and management. This allowed a more careful supervision over the production process, a watch over quality, and the regulation of labor, all of which had been difficult to do when production was in the countryside. As you can see here, children, the multiple inventions during the 18th century led to the increase in the efficacy of each step of the production process. So these inventions increased the output per worker and enabled them to produce more. Not only this, they could now produce stronger threads and yarn. Later on, Richard Arkwright, he invented the cotton mill. So now a new change was seen in the production process. Earlier cloth production was spread all over the countryside and carried out within village households, but now the merchants started purchasing machines and setting up of the mills. So this facilitated the whole process, which was now carried under one roof. This led to a more careful supervision of the whole production process, and now one could take care of various functions such as keeping a watch over quantity and regulation of labor. So such things were not possible when the work was carried out in the countryside, and in the beginning of the 19th century, factories became an important part of the English landscape. So now we'll see how rapid was the process of industrialization, and did it only meant setting up of new factories? Let's see it some other stages. The next topic, the pace of industrial change. First, the most dynamic industries in Britain were clearly cotton and metals. Growing at a rapid pace, cotton was the leading sector in the first phase of industrialization up to the 1840s. After that, the iron and steel industry led the way. With the expansion of railways in England from the 1840s and in the colonies from the 1860s, the demand for iron and steel increased rapidly. By 1873, Britain was exporting iron and steel worth about £77 million, double the value of its cotton export. Okay, children, so if you see the pace of industrial change, the first one is the industries that gained popularity in Britain. They were that of the cotton and the metal. And in 1840s, cotton industry was the leading industry in Britain. And later on came the iron and the steel industry. But with the expansion of the railway network in England during the 1840s and in colonies during 1860s, the demand for iron and steel started gaining space. So by 1873, Britain was exporting iron and steel worth £77 million, and it was double the value of its cotton exports. Second one, the new industries could not easily displace traditional industries. Even at the end of the 19th century, less than 20% of the total workforce was employed in technologically advanced industrial sectors. Textiles was a dynamic sector, but a large portion of the output was produced not within factories but outside within domestic units. Children, if you see the second point, the new industries were not able to replace traditional industries fully. So it can be seen in the end of the 19th century also that less than 20% of the total workforce was working in the technically advanced industries. Like textiles, for example, was a dynamic sector. Still, much of its production were produced in the household units and not in the factories. The pace of change in the traditional industries was not set by steam-powered cotton or metal industries, but they did not remain entirely stagnant either. Seemingly ordinary and small innovations were the basis of growth in many non-mechanized sectors such as food processing, building, pottery, glasswork, tanning, furniture making, and production of implements. Children, if you see the third pace, the speed of change in the traditional industries was not set by the steam-powered cotton mills or the metal industries, but we can't say that these industries became motionless, though some small innovations served as the basis of growth in many non-mechanized fields, for example, food processing, pottery, building, furniture making, etc. Fourth, technological changes occurred slowly. They did not spread dramatically across the industrial landscape. New technology was expensive, and merchants and industrialists were cautious about using it. The machines often broke down, and repair was costly. They were not as effective as the inventors and manufacturers claimed. Children, if you see the fourth pace, the technological changes occurred slowly due to some reason. For example, buying such machines was a costly affair, so many of the industrialists were not in favor of this. So moreover, the repair of these machines was also costly, and they were not as good as it was claimed by the inventors or makers. So consider the case of the steam engine. James Watt improved the steam engine produced by Newcomen and patented the new engine in 1781. His industrialist friend Matthew Boulton manufactured the new model, but for years he could find no buyers. At the beginning of the 19th century, there were no more than 321 steam engines all over England. Of these, 80 were in cotton industries, 9 in wool industries, and the rest in mining, canal works, and iron works. Steam engines were not used in any of the other industries till much later in the century. So, even the most powerful new technology that enhanced the productivity of labor manifold was slow to be accepted by industrialists. So historians now have come to increasingly recognize that the typical worker in the mid-19th century was not a machine operator but the traditional craftsperson and laborer. Children, will stop up to here and we'll continue in the next class. So you'll get your keynotes through PDF. So kindly write it in your classwork notebook. We'll see in the next class. Thank you.